That's a great question, and thanks for asking that, because there was a point I was going to make in my remarks and blew right past it. Internal to the design of the WaterSense program, and building on my comments regarding the role of partners earlier, EPA in managing the WaterSense program does not do any independent research. We don't have sort of research labs, product testing labs. That's not what we do. We're not even close from a budget standpoint to be able to do that, first of all. Second of all, we don't have the expertise. You have the expertise. And so to the extent that there are products or product categories out there that sort of, the professionals in this room feel are ripe for efficiency, that there's another threshold there, there's the standard, and then there's something that's better, that's available, that there's a testing protocol that exists or can be developed, we'd love to hear about those. Again, we will always have to keep an eye on sort of the ability from a budget standpoint to move products through the validation process. But to the extent that you come to us with those products that have been identified, almost like Mr. Freeman's comments earlier, you come to us with sort of say, here's what the need is, here's the product, here's the test, that sort of greases that skid in terms of moving products towards a label. So open invitation for not only the gray water reuse sector, but any other sort of classes of products that you all feel are ripe for labeling. We'd love to have that conversation. Thanks for that question. Great question.
Oh, thank you. John Swarfield from Scotland. I just thought you might be interested in the UK approach to this from the government regulation point of view, where we've now introduced a system where we will allow planning permission for new housing on the basis of the outcome of the sort of water calculator that you've been talking about. And for public authority housing, that will be set at 125 litres per person in the dwelling. And also that against that 125 litres per person per day, we will offset any benefits of water reuse, whether rainwater harvesting or grey water reuse. I think that then there will be the ability for local authorities to grant permission to build against that standard, and clearly that can be changed across the country depending on the amount of water which is available. I think the point I'd like a comment from you on is I believe that that is a very good system, except how do you know 18 months later that in actual fact what you approved is still what is actually happening? Regulation without follow-up does to me seem to be a rather toothless dog. Thank you.
I know sort of some of the conversation that will go on during this conference is the tension between a sort of incentive-based voluntary market program and a regulatory-based program that deals with sort of efficiency and sort of levels of product performance. I am aware that, and I know there's representatives here from Australia, that given sort of the prolonged drought and some of the challenges of water management in Australia, their efficiency program is sort of looks much more like a regulatory program than a sort of voluntary market program. I understand sort of that's the program that you just described. I think sort of from a U.S. perspective, we're certainly not there now. I think as time goes on, certainly in different sectors, as water resources are under more stress because of both population growth and some of the numbers I touched on earlier, but also the as yet undetermined regional impacts of climate change and sort of the higher peaks and the lower valleys, et cetera, that may be part of the conversation in our future. How you validate that? Certainly, there are different models, and sort of we're not, have not begun the effort yet. So very sort of early, given 30 seconds of thought on the question, kind of a response. Certainly metering systems that exist today can identify on almost a real-time basis use at individual locations, then response options are either certainly a very clear price signal that the certain location was designed for so much use. If you use more than that, you get a very clear price signal, or over a certain level, perhaps even restricted use. Although, again, those are just initial responses in terms of, as you put a regulatory program in place, how do you manage that over time? Certainly the market and pricing structures is proven in many cases to be very effective at sort of managing use.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. Jim, with the success of the WaterSense program over the past 4 years, a number of jurisdictions have taken the provisions and made them mandatory by state or by municipality and so forth. So what they've done is turned a voluntary program into mandatory in certain areas. What do you feel about that, or how do you feel about that as affecting the future of a voluntary program?
From EPA standpoint, there are no plans to sort of codify from a regulatory standpoint the WaterSense program. I suspect that the drivers on a local jurisdiction basis, in terms of through local ordinances or codes, are requiring WaterSense either for perhaps buyback programs in terms of an incentive. Certainly, as we worked with the industry and the utilities to design the WaterSense program, that was one of the drivers that we heard, is that there were utilities that had incentive or sort of buyback programs like the one here in Los Angeles and Seattle and Austin and other places around the country, but they all had different lists. And in part, the manufacturer said, time out, it would be very helpful that if we had sort of one list that we could sort of design, or one specification that we could design products to. And so in part, that was the interest of the stakeholders, the manufacturers, utilities, et cetera, that drove the development of the WaterSense program at the outset. And so using that common specification for that kind of use, I'm not sure that's all the way to regulatory, but it's some standardization, certainly makes a lot of sense. I think if there are places, as I said in response to the previous question, where they're at a critical point because of drought, because of growth, because of interruption or effect on their water supply resources, that they have to effectively regulate water use. And outdoor water restrictions, all those kinds of things we've heard of over time in terms of temporary impacts. If a utility chooses to use that, again, from our perspective, when we put that label on a product, we believe it will meet the 20% minimum water use calculation, the water use specification that's on the product, we will stand behind, and also that the product will work. So I think that's the value that the WaterSense program and the label brings to those local jurisdictions that find themselves in the place of having to make that decision. Again, thank you for your attention.